And in this, I suggest that all human beings, we are double beings. That we have our everyday, ordinary self, which I call the eidolon, which exists within linear time and only lives once, only lives one life. Okay. Then there is the daemon, which is the what you would understand as being, or many people would understand as being, your spirit guide, your higher self, your over self. And it's something that occurs and has occurred in philosophy and in religious beliefs since the beginning of time. Effectively, people have always been fascinated by this idea that we have something within us that is not us but is part of us. And I argue that the daemon is the immortal you. It's what some people would call the soul. And it is the daemon that carries through all of your lives, all of the repeats of your lives. It's almost like your game player. Imagine that, when you play a computer game, the first time you don't know your way around, you get lost and you have many things. But over a period of time with each of the games in the same environment, you end up with a pretty good idea of where you need to go, where you're going to meet the monsters and everything else to avoid them. And I argue this is what literally happens, that the daemon is your game player. It's the immortal you. And it guides its eidolon through life. Now, going back to your very good question about Greece, Greece is a country that I have visited countless times. I mean, I've only just come back from Greece. I was in Greece for 3 weeks and I only got back last week, going to more and more obscure parts of Greece. And I'm delighted to say that 2 of my books are now out in Greek, with negotiations for a potential 3rd book coming out in Greek, the new book as well. And indeed, myself and a group of associates are planning to do an event in Greece probably next year, where we're going to be recreating Plato's cave. Now, the reason that Greek philosophy intrigues me is that it has some incredible truths within it. For instance, the concept of Plato's cave and the idea that we are existing within some form of simulation. Simulation is the wrong word. In my new book, I use the word instantation, which is more accurate because a simulation suggests that it's a copy of something else, whereas my associate researcher, Dr. Andrew Gallimore, uses the term instantation, and I think it's a far better idea. But Plato argued that everything that we understand and perceive is given to us by our senses. This is how we perceive reality. We never interface directly with external reality. And he used in his, I think it was the 4th book of his series of books, The Republic, he gives an example. He explains to somebody in the book that imagine a situation where there is a group of prisoners that have been kept in a dark cave, with them sitting down, looking at the back wall of the cave. They can't move their heads. All they can do is look at the back wall. And behind them, towards the cave entrance, is a fire. And between the fire and them, there is a walkway. And what happens is that over periods of time, people walk over the walkway and their shadows are reflected on the back wall in front of the prisoners. So all the prisoners see of reality are shadows on a wall. And on the shadows, there'll be people that will walk across the walkway, and they will have cutouts of animals and everything else, and planets and everything else. And the prisoners believe that is reality. Reality is the shadows on the wall, because they've never experienced anything else. But one of the prisoners breaks his shackles, stands up and walks past the fire and walks to the entrance of the cave, and sees reality as it really is, and sees the beauty of the sky and everything else as well. Goes back to his friends and says, hey guys, what you think is reality isn't. There's shadows on the wall. This is not what is real. And of course they consider him insane. They consider him crazy, and they say, don't be silly. Shadows on the wall is what it's all about. There isn't anything else. And I'd argue people who have extraordinary experiences, people who have out-of-the-body experiences, near-death experiences, experiences with entheogens such as DMT, they go to the entrance of the cave and they see reality as it really is, and they come back to tell us what they see. And of course we consider them to be insane, because that's the way we see the world. Now, that Plato's cave is so accurate because Plato argued that there is a reality behind this reality, and it's part of Greek myth. The idea is that the world we live within is a facsimile, and this world we live within is what is called the canoma. It's a false creation, and there is a real reality behind, which they call the pleroma, and the pleroma literally in Greek means fullness, and everything we perceive here are reflections of the real things that are in the pleroma. And these are called Plato's forms, because Plato argued that everything we experience in this world is a reflection of something that exists somewhere else. Now, this idea carried forward to a lot of other religion and belief systems. For instance, the early Christian Gnostics took it on board and considered that this reality that we exist within is a creation of what was called the demiurge. They called it the demiurge, a being called Yaldabaoth. And they argued that Yaldabaoth was the demiurge, which literally means false creator, the half maker. And the idea is that this is not real. We think it's real, but it's not. We're trapped within our meat machines perceiving this. Now, again, if you then move on to, and in the book, in the new book, I take you right through this. So I take you through and I say, well, of course, within the Hindu tradition, we have the concept of Maya. And Maya is the concept, again, that this is not real. This is not what it seems. And we are all part of a dream of Brahman, the consciousness of the universe. Now, going back to my daemon eidolon model, what I then argue is that above the daemon and the eidolon is what I was talking about earlier, the collective unconscious, what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious of mankind. I call that the uberdaemon, as I said, but I then argue behind that is an even greater all-encompassing consciousness field, which I call the godemon. And the godemon is effectively what we would call God. It's the consciousness of the whole universe. It is the consciousness field by which this reality, this program, it's where the information comes from to run this program that we exist within. And the ancient Greeks really understood this. And they really were interested in this, and the Greek philosophers. But if you look through, and again in the new book, I take you through, most of the great philosophers were very much taking a very similar position to myself. Even the modern philosophers like Martin Heidegger. But going back to Immanuel Kant and various other philosophers, they very much were on the idea of what is reality? When we say that something is real, what do we mean? When we perceive something out there, what is it really? And of course, modern quantum physics tells us that what we think is reality, and this is science, and this is the exact figure. The chair you are sitting on is 99.9999999999996 empty space. That is a fact. And the bits of solid somethings that are left in all that are the quarks, and there are 6 of them, and photons and electrons. Photons and quarks are what's called point particles. It means they have no extension in space. They are literally, however much you zoom in, they're just a point. And everything we perceive is made up of the interactions of these fleeting objects that sometimes are particles, they're sometimes waves, depending on whether we observe them or not. The universe is an incredibly complex and incredibly fascinating place. But believe me, when you think something is solid in front of you, it's not. The only reason your bottom doesn't fall through the chair is something called electrostatic repulsion. Because it means that the electrons at the edge of the atoms of your bottom and the electrons at the edge of the atoms in your chair are both the same charge. And we know that like charges repulse. So effectively what's happening is it's like an electromagnetic field that you hover above. You never ever touch anything. So when people say, I touch my lover's skin or I taste some food, no, you don't. You never interact with anything. We are all stuck within these little electrostatic bubbles. That's what reality really is, and that's what science tells us reality is. And this is what the ancient Greeks knew, and what a lot of the ancient philosophies knew. And this is the area that we need to be moving into to understand. And green and red objectively do not exist. They are literally what's called qualia. This is something that the brain interprets that particular frequency as being that colour. But colour exists nowhere. There is no colour. And there's also an argument to say that even depth is an illusion. There is no space. Because if you think about it, and philosophers have thought about this for hundreds of years, if there were no objects in space, no planets or stars, what would happen to the space? Because space is literally nothing, philosophically and scientifically. But of course, we now know from modern science that in fact space is far from empty. There's something called the 0-point field. There's the quantum vacuum. It's full of particles we can't perceive that pop in and out of reality. And going back to the ancient Greek myth, what did I say earlier? That the pleroma is called the fullness. And this is because in some way the ancient Greeks knew about 0-point energy, the 0-point field, and the quantum vacuum. And they said the reality behind the reality is the information that is held within the quantum vacuum. This is what we are perceiving. We are perceiving literally an information field. Everything is digital, everything is mathematical. And our brain creates this reality around us for us to perceive within it. Just like a sprite on your computer screen when Lara Croft runs through Angkor Wat on the computer game, you're perceiving what she perceives. And we all know there are just bits of information. There's no depth, there's no monsters, there's no anything. It is just information.